Okay, so one of the main things we ought to do in life is to get to grips with who and what we are. And from that standpoint, to then make your investigations. Well, of course, logic would tell us that we have five senses and therefore we operate within that realm. Realm, perhaps not quite the right word there, because realm might suggest something spiritual. Try telling something spiritual to the natural man. Well, the natural man receiveth not of the things of the Spirit of God. Now, people are interested in the Spirit, but as soon as you say that word, God, suddenly they might switch off because of preconditioning. So, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, or the spiritual, either way you choose to look at it. For they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But it's easier to talk to someone who has some kind of spiritual discernment. And I guess you don't have to be super spiritual to have some kind of spiritual discernment. Many of us can testify to something spiritual happening to them, and therefore might try to explain this to the natural man, the natural everyday man who lives and operates within the realm of the five senses, who's perhaps never had any spiritual realities come his way, though of course ultimately everyone will, to various degrees. So getting to grips with who and what we are is important, because we mostly, most of us operate in the physical world. We look at the world around us, we hear the world around us, we touch the world around us, we taste the world around us, we smell the world around us. But some, of course, have these other experiences that testify to another reality, and therefore people choose to call this even a sixth sense. So you have, let's say, this sixth sense, where it comes from, whether you feel it was born in you or it's coming from other sources, be that source God or the devil or angel or visitation, departed saint, whichever. Well, again, the subject matter here is to get to grips with who and what we are. And who and what we are, does that follow? Is that everything we're meant to be? Is the thing there? Now, who and what we are is one thing, but are we everything we were meant to be or ever will be meant to be? This is our standpoint. And this is where people should be going with their thinking. Though, of course, most people don't address this side to life because they're frightened of it. And you might discover things you don't want to hear. Well, of course, there's evidence of the same that other people have had, and this has all been written down and recorded. And so you may tune into your own experiences or have your own source or ways and means of making that connection with the spiritual. And of course, you might choose to see it this way or that way, and various people have their different thinkings and ideas, and we all see through a form of a glass darkly. And even it says in various scriptures, and some of these scriptures all agree with each other, whether you're of the Judaism or you're a Muslim or you're Christian or other, they tend to even borrow or quote from the same pages, though they might put it differently in their own different ways. They would be talking much the same in a lot of occasions. And you'll find it's interesting what these various prophets, let's say, have said, that the visions and revelations that people were given were often in similitudes. So, in other words, largely all of these prophets and saints that got their various visions and dreams and revelations were largely in the realm of, let's say, the realm or the reality of similitude. So, in other words, it's like this or it's like that, and there's physical illustrations to explain something spiritual. So, indeed, this spiritual side to life does exist. And the thing is, most people might find this fascinating, but others actually don't find this fascinating. And other people have had spiritual realities or experiences happen to them and have found themselves on that hook, so to speak. Now, it's okay finding yourself on that hook, if that's one way of putting it, if you're enjoying the experience, but it doesn't always follow that people enjoy such things or visitations or visions or dreams or revelations or seeing things that speak of the spiritual, though it might come to them in a vision or a dream and they'll see the similitude, the likeness in a physical illustration of the same. So there's plenty of physical illustrations to explain the spiritual, and people often say in extreme circumstances, usually explaining something awful, words fail me. The feeling or the strength of feeling or the intensity of such feeling can be so that you can't explain it with physical realities. Words fail you. So words can sometimes stand in the way and be obstacles, though of course we need to explain something even to a doctor. Can you explain pain? It's like this, doctor, it's like that, it's kind of sharp, or it's kind of dull, it's kind of, you're trying to explain something that you can't quite find a physical reality to explain. So this is the problems a lot of people have who have or had or do have something spiritual happen to them. And it doesn't follow that it's just a case of them being so spiritual, because it could happen to just about anyone. And there are, of course, interesting accounts of the same, and they don't always tell you, or you don't have told you things you want to hear. And this is why so many people run away from such experiences. Why? Because it goes against public opinion. You often challenge the majority view, and you go against the status quo. So very often the things you might discover might make you run a mile away from such things. And this is why so many people do just this, because it means largely stepping out of the big crowds, stepping out of safety in numbers, which most people see as an instinct. It's a very powerful instinct to find safety and security in numbers. And so people flock to the big crowds, and most people are happy to be spoon-fed rather than to go deep and look deeper into things. Well, so don't forget, the subject matter here is who and what we are. Well, who and what we are, and even where we are, your perception of reality, it should be that we're in a physical world. And another thing some of the saints said, we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal. So why would you seek eternal realities as opposed to physical, temporary realities? So we look not at the things which are seen. So most people would say, well, that's not much of a survival course for you, to go through life looking at the things which are not seen as opposed to things which are seen. So what you're saying is you're seeking the spiritual above the physical. There has to be a balance there. Labour not for the meat which perisheth, but for that which endureth unto everlasting life. Well, the meat which perisheth would be this body which is eventually going to die. So why spend your life labouring for the meat which perisheth, but rather labour for that which endureth unto everlasting life. So there has to be a balance there. Yes, we all need to labour for the meat which perisheth, because we have to keep ourselves alive. But on the other hand, we're told by saints and prophets, but rather labour for that which endureth unto everlasting life. Which pops the question, are we going to have everlasting life? And what is everlasting life? Well, everlasting life, we all know that we've got a body that's going to die. And okay, if you're looking at this spiritually and you believe, you're one of those that believe, you're, in simple terms, a spirit that lives in a body. That somehow or other, it appears that the spirit, it would appear, let's say, entered the body at the time of birth. We know, we have accounts of Jesus Christ who said words to the effect, before Abraham was, I am, he said. In other words, he's coming from eternity, he's going to eternity, he comes from timelessness in this respect, in that he was never created. So Jesus was clearly in existence before Abraham was, and he calls himself I am. Before Abraham was, I am. So Jesus was never created, he never began, he never ended. It's like, well, he did begin, and in a sense, he's the beginning and the end, the first and the last. But he's trying to explain again something spiritual right there, when he said, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. But on the other hand, he is I am, in that he was never created. We are creatures that are created, so we begin. And therefore, in this same sense, we end. Well, do we end? We end along the way when we die. But who and what we are, was your body ever meant to die? Did people ever consider this? A lot of people consider, okay, look, I go with... we came to this world. I was a spirit, let's say, if you choose to see it that way, just like Jesus. He appears to have entered into the baby when Mary gave birth. Jesus Christ appears to have left his great place in heaven, in the heavenlies, in the spiritual realm. And him being I am, before Abraham was, I am. Him being whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. So he's coming from everlasting, he's going to everlasting, he comes from everlasting along the way, let's say, to put it in simple terms. He leaves his place in heaven and is made flesh, so he becomes flesh, like as we are. He becomes a human being, like as we are. We clearly are human beings. But are we just human beings in an exterior sense? Well, it's interesting when these various prophets, saints, patriarchs spoke of the body and spoke of the spirit. And we know, said St. Paul, if the earthly house of this body, if the earthly house of this tabernacle, he's referring to his body, is using a similitude, a similar way, a way of explaining this by using a house symbolically or a temple symbolically. For we know that if this earthly house of our body were dissolved, we have a building of God and a house eternal in the heavens. In other words, we have a body that God's not made with human hands, that God is going to eventually give us a body not made with hands. In other words, it's not like here. Please excuse my coughing. I have asthma, but there's enough of that. Sometimes I have a little drink of water to clear my throat. This awful asthma that people suffer these days. But so, which is, of course, an interest in me, that this corruptible, this body that could be corrupted by illnesses and even death, well, this corruptible, in that respect, not the corruptible in the moral sense, though that don't help, because in the moral sense, the body was corrupted from the beginning when Eve ate of the forbidden fruit and then gave it lovingly or whatever through pride, whatever, to her husband of that day, though she weren't married at the time. They never had a ceremony other than God brought them together. This is a true sense of marriage. And of course, in this world, people are married and given in marriage, but they might marry at a registry office. This, in God's eyes, the true definition of marriage is that God brought two people together. Well, in marriage, in union, they twain become one flesh and operate as one, two halves of the same wheel, and so they roll along as one body. So interesting when you look into these things, and there are various verses about that come up. So we'll go into that in a minute. So this corruptible will one day put on incorruption. This is partly on the subject of who we are, what we are. Were we ever meant to die? So God creates mankind. He creates Adam and Eve, and he creates them male and female. In the image of God created he them. So we're made in the image of God. So there's your kind of similitude, in that we're made in the image of God. So it's not quite black and white. Yes, we're made in the image of God. And Jesus, of course, knew that one day he too would become flesh. So we're made in the image of God. You have an example of someone who lived in the spirit world in Jesus that comes to this world and put on human flesh. The Word, in other words, Jesus Christ being the Word, was made flesh, and he dwelt among us, became like we are, and was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sins. Tempted by who? Tempted by the flesh, tempted by the devil, or the devil's fallen angels who work together with him, tempting Jesus along the way, and even the devil appearing to Jesus just before his ministry began, and taking him to a great and high mountain and showing him all of the kingdoms of the world, and promising him these if he would bow down and worship him. So clearly there you have another spiritual reality popping into the equation. And when people hear such talk of the devil, they automatically clock up pictures of a being with two horns and a long tail, and maybe dressed in red with a big black cloak and a long beard. Well, that imagery or similitude of Satan comes from the book of Revelation, where it talks about the beast and all of this kind of thinking. And the dragon symbolizing the devil, the great dragon, is that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. So a great red dragon, hence you have the colour red often used when people draw up pictures of Satan. The devil, Lucifer, the fallen one, who is now Satan in rebellion against God. So we call him Satan because he's in rebellion against God. He was once Lucifer, and he was second down in command from God, right there at the throne of God, created most beautiful and full of wisdom. So very beautiful, very wise, a clever mind, in other words. Very wise from the beginning, but got into self-worship. And so he fell from grace, fell from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, was in that sense cast down. And from then onwards, because of his pride and love of self, he chooses to tempt mankind and bring mankind away from the worship of God and over to the worship of Satan, Lucifer, as he chooses, or would prefer to be called. So this realm clearly exists, and such talk would make people run a mile, run a million miles away from such thinking. So though many would be interested and curious in one aspect of this, maybe they hear of mediums, maybe they hear of the New Age, maybe they hear of getting out of here and all of these distresses, worries and woes to get out of life, and maybe the other life looks more inviting, and take a chance with that, and even commit suicide and leave here and hope for the best, throw caution to the wind, and trust that even though you've never had any experience of such places, you've only heard such things, There's got to be another place, another life, somewhere out there, better than this, and maybe I can leave my body, spirit, and go into that other realm. Well, again, that would be panicking, wouldn't it? But better said, get to grips with who and what you are, where you're meant to go. Are you a body? Yes, we are. We can clearly see this. Are you a spirit? Well, there's interesting accounts of the same, and life's full of strange irony. And here's an ironic account of someone who clearly come from that other realm back to this realm, having died and gone to that realm. And it's the story of Samuel. It's an account here of Samuel. Samuel was a prophet, a renowned prophet for his day. And so Saul, being the king back then, faced many battles, many wars. And of course, the question of life and death always hung in the balance there. Very much a matter of life and death. We live in a day and age where it's not like we have so many wars. But of course, there's wars and rumours of wars, and all this talk of World War III, etc. these days doesn't help. And the world economy doesn't help. So we might, with a lot of people, pop the question of life and death more than they ever did. So very much a day and age of life and death. Many wars would bring that great matter of life and death to the very forefront of people's thinking, and such was the case with Saul, the king. And of course, he had a war looming, many wars looming, and another war looming. And the prophet Samuel had died. Now, Saul back then it was a different world. Very much aware of the spiritual. Even Saul himself, it says, prophesied. Even Saul himself was anointed to be king. Yes, poured oil over his head symbolically, symbolizing the anointing that he was going to come under from God himself. And of course, pouring oil over the king's head to anoint him as king and then placing the crown upon his head. Was it just a matter of placing a crown upon his head? He was now going to be the anointed king of Israel. And therefore, he would have a connection spiritually with God himself, with angels sent by God himself even. And therefore, the king would operate under the anointing that comes from God, not just the anointing as in a feeling, but a lot of his counsel and advice and wisdom would be coming from God himself. And he was a wise king. Then he would lean to the spiritual, look to the spiritual, and even look to God's prophet of the day. The prophet of the day was Samuel. And Sam used to get very specific things from God. So Saul come to rely upon Samuel for specific revelations from God. But the problem is with prophets, they don't always tell us things we want to hear. Now, false prophets will tell us things we want to hear. They will tickle our ears. So we're itching to hear things, and they will tell us things, having itching ears. For in the last days they shall heap up for themselves teachers having itching ears. In other words, they itch to hear such things, and these false prophets and teachers will be heaped up in the last days and will tell us things which we are itching to hear. Where we're itching to hear that one day we're going to get out of all of this. And when Jesus said, look up, when you see these things come to pass, look up. For your redemption draweth nigh. But then do we go with the premature redemption, or do we go with Jesus saying all these end time prophecies have to first happen and then Jesus comes back? And so you get many on here that are appealing to people's appetites and teaching them things which they are itching to hear. The great quarrel of the pre-tribulation or Jesus coming back after the tribulation of those days. Personally, of course, I go with Jesus coming back after the tribulation of those days and not before. So a lot of people these days, of course, life being as tough as it is, troublesome as it is, as painful it is, and the world economy and the world today isn't such a nice place. And this usually inspires or evokes or brings thoughts into people's minds of how, what on earth's life all about? If you didn't suffer, you wouldn't ask these questions. If everything was going okay in people's lives, they wouldn't ask these questions as to why we are here. Now, once you have a lot of troubles in your life, you start to wonder why on earth all this is happening to you of all people. Well, it's not you of all people, it's you of every person as going through their troubles, woes, trials and tests, and you might think, to what end? And this is where it pops the question, well, who am I? What am I? Where am I meant to go? How do I view things? Is there another world better than this world? Can I get out of this world and go into another world one day? When I die, will I leave this world and go to a better place? And could I simply die tomorrow and leave this world, and then where would I go? So it pops the question of the great matter of life and death, and who and what we are, and what happens after death, and what are we doing here even? Why was I even born? Did I come from another world? When was my spirit created? Do I enter this life at the very moment of conception in the womb? Well, if you look into this, John the Baptist was actually baptized with the Holy Spirit from his womb. Mary was 6 months pregnant with Jesus after being visited by the angel Gabriel, and was suddenly miraculously pregnant. The Holy Spirit came, overshadowed her, and came upon her, and that thing, that baby that's going to be in her womb, will be the Son of God. So Jesus is the Father of God is the Father of Jesus, and at that point Mary conceived, and a virgin shall conceive and shall bear a son. Well, 6 months into her pregnancy, she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth. So she's had an spiritual experiences this age. She's no doubt going about her daily business. She's going to get married to Joseph, and who should turn up but an archangel, a top angel, a most powerful angel, an angel that's thousands of years old. Thousands of years old. The same angel that visited Daniel is now visiting Mary. So the same angel that was visiting Daniel was high up in the kingdom of Babylon. A great, well-learned, Daniel being a very well-learned man, and a lot of what he learned, of course, was godly knowledge. Yes, a well-learned man, and he's operating at the top of the great Babylonian kingdom, the great empire of Babylon. And of course, Daniel was getting his wisdom and his counsel and his knowledge inspired by God, though of course he was well learned in the ways of speak more than one language in this, and so was well qualified, either his own God-given God giving him no doubt a clever mind through which he could study, but him acknowledging that mind and that clever mind that he was given as a gift of God. And then no doubt following God all the way through. So the same angel Gabriel that cancelled and spoke with Daniel, not just to Daniel but to us too, speaking to him, as speaking to him in running the affairs of the Babylonian kingdom, and also speaking to him about the affairs of the last days and how the Antichrist would arise, etc. Now, that was spoken to Daniel being a form of a medium with the spiritual, and him explaining the same to us. But Daniel also spoke of Jesus and also spoke of the second coming of Jesus. Well, here's this angel Gabriel that imparted all of this knowledge of the spiritual in the last days onto Daniel, now visiting Mary. Mary, a sweet young girl who's going to be married to Joseph, and telling her that she's going to become pregnant and have a baby. And of all things, this baby is going to be the Son of God. Well, who's going to believe her? So she goes to see Elizabeth. And upon entering the room to visit Elizabeth, and as I recall, actually, she was 3 months pregnant with Jesus. And Elizabeth would have been 6 months pregnant. Well, suddenly the baby leapt in her womb, leapt in the womb of Elizabeth, this is, John the Baptist, 6 months old, in the womb of Elizabeth, suddenly leaps in the womb upon Mary entering in the room with Jesus Christ in her womb, 3 months old. Suddenly the baby leapt in her womb. So you think, well, when does the spirit enter into the body? If you look at it like that, is it at the time of conception and even in the womb? Which, of course, people don't want to hear these days, because that bring in the great matter of abortion. Well, 3 months old Jesus in the womb of Mary entering into the room, and John the Baptist 6 months old. Well, it begs the question, well, if John the Baptist leapt in the womb and was baptized, it goes on to say in the scriptures, with the Holy Spirit from the womb. So the Holy Spirit, what does the Holy Spirit do? It leads and guides us into all truth. So John the Baptist, was he led and guided into all truth even in the womb? Well, that tells you that there is a strange reality and connection between the spiritual and the physical, and even the reality of the spirit of John the Baptist being already in the womb, even at 6 months old, and Jesus being in the womb at 3 months old. So the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us as soon as Jesus was born. So did Jesus enter into the, did he put on this human flesh? Paul likening human flesh to a house, which we will one day be clothed with. So a form of a clothing for the spirit, if you look at it that way. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, in other words, died, this earthly house of this tabernacle being the body died, we have a building of God, not made a house, and not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So one day your body's going to die. And yet you have this house, an eternal house, eternal in the heavens, this eternal body with which, the same of which, you will one day be clothed upon. So you're looking at your body there in the similitude as being a house, a temple. It says a tabernacle being a temple, a tabernacle being a temple that they used in the Old Testament as a temple. Well, the tent tabernacle is where God would appear to Moses. God would visit the children of Israel and go in or over the tent, would even go in the tent, God being a spirit. And they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. And Moses would actually see the similitude of God, so shall he behold. So he didn't quite see God, but he would see the similitude of God. Moses was so close to God that he actually saw the similitude of God. Now, a prophet doesn't necessarily altogether see the similitude of God. We hold an image in our mind of what God may or may not look like. But no one knows exactly what God looks like. And it's like, in the same sense, we're perhaps not allowed to know in case we make an image unto God. It's interesting what Moses said in the Old Testament when he's talking about God, if I can find the page. And he's talking, you didn't see God, he said. Though you heard God's voice, you didn't see what God looked like. He's talking in Deuteronomy to the children of Israel. And this is interesting because if you are a Christian, then you are communicating with God. But of course, there is one God and one mediator between God and man, and that man, the man, Jesus Christ. So Jesus Christ, the Word, was made flesh, and therefore we can't comprehend God, what he looks like. And so we have Jesus, who was made in the image of a man. And so Jesus, we approach God through Jesus. But interesting when you consider God, the Father of spirits, eternal in the heavens. What does he look like? Well, here's an interesting thing that Moses said. Now, he's telling them to keep God's ways and laws. Why? Because that keeps you in the spirit and presence of God. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, only take heed to yourself and keep thy soul. He's talking body and spirit here. Body and spirit, you are a body and a spirit. When God breathed into Adam's nostrils, God creates Adam of the dust of the ground. You picture, let's picture Adam now being created of dust. Now, everything we eat comes from the ground. Would be logical to be created of dust. Therefore, everything we eat that comes from the ground, or if it's meat or vegetation or whatever, all comes from the ground, all comes from dust, it all comes from dirt. So God creates Adam from the dust of the ground. Everything, whatever you are is what you eat. Whatever you eat is what you are. So I'm sat here. What am I? I'm cabbages and carrots and a stew that I had the other day. It all gets transformed into my body. I am what I eat. So I am from the dust. God creates Adam from the dust. So you picture Adam's lifeless body there and not even breathing. So was he breathing? Wasn't he breathing? What did it mean when God breathed into Adam's nostrils? Why his nostrils and not his mouth? You picture the nostrils seem to go up to consciousness. If you breathe into someone's nostrils, then the Adam became a living soul. So God, the very breath of God, the very breath of life from God, the very breath of spiritual life from God, and God breathes, not necessarily as we breathe, physically we breathe air. Think of spiritual air, so God breathed spiritually. God is a spirit, they that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. So the spiritual God, God being a spirit, breathed into Adam's nostrils, spiritual air, so to speak. God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and suddenly Adam is conscious. Yeah, we might use the word consciousness as a lot of New Age people do, but clearly he became conscious. Now, what is consciousness? If you look at it that way, is consciousness really is largely to do with your spirit. The fact that we are conscious is because we became what? What did Adam do when he suddenly, his lifeless body was lying there on the ground, right? First man ever created was never a baby, was never a boy, never a teenager, created a man. God then breathes into his nostrils and Adam becomes a living soul. He's now both body and spirit. He has a spirit now in his body and he's conscious. You picture Adam suddenly waking up as if out of a deep sleep. And he's suddenly conscious in that body. Aware of the world around him, just like a newborn baby, except that he was never born, created by God himself. He sees the world around him, he hears the world around him, he smells, he tastes, and he can touch. And God is communicating with him, and he's clearly conscious. Well, one thing you could say you do find, and that is people who get messages from the other realm are fully aware of, they're conscious of someone speaking to them. They might not hear it with their ears. They might not see the person with their eyes. They might not be able to touch, taste, or smell. Person enters the room, they're wearing perfume or aftershave, whatever, you can smell. They haven't had a bath. Either way, you look at it, you can smell them. You might not know what they smell like, taste like, hear like, but you do get a message from them. So a form of telepathy, consciousness, you're conscious of this, that, or the other taking place, and you can't explain it. It's a spiritual reality that you can't explain to anyone else. You can't just exactly put it in front of them and say, this is worth weight of gold, you know. This experience, this reality that I'm bringing to you is worth its weight in gold. It's pure gold. If you could get a big slab of pure gold and hold it in front of someone's eyes and say, look, believe me, I am a trillion billionaire. I'm a secret millionaire. I'm a secret trillionaire. I have all of these treasures of gold, which I wish to give to you. We prove it. You can't prove it. You can't bring out the gold. You can't bring out all of these jewels. I have all of these treasures. Jesus said, cast not your pearls even before swine. I have all of these pearls of wisdom that Jesus has given me, or given this person or that person, saying the same. Not just one, not just another, not just because of his great upbringing or birth or background or education. Simply Jesus gave it out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, hast thou perfected phrase. So I thank thee, O Father, that thou hast not revealed these things unto the wise and prudent, but hast revealed them unto babes. How does a babe present these wonders and pearls to the wise and prudent? Just like that man who had his hand healed. He said, look, I don't know. He was talking to the wise and prudent, the Pharisees. Look, I don't know who he is or where he's from. All I know was I was blind, or I had a bad arm. I couldn't use my arm. And Jesus healed me. This is all I know. Why hearing is a marvelous thing, he says, and why are you questioning this man Jesus? He's a prophet, he said. He didn't have a great education. He didn't have great knowledge. All he knew was that Jesus imparted this great pearl of wisdom to him. He healed his troubled body, eased his troubled mind by healing his body. And who say ye that this is, says the Pharisees, as I recall. This man says, he's a prophet. Well, who are you to tell us, says the Pharisees, the scribes and Pharisees. You're just a little nobody. You are blind. You were faking it. You were never blind. You made this whole thing up. Jesus didn't heal your eyes. Jesus healed on the Sabbath day someone's hand, or actually I recall now, he healed his eyes and he could suddenly see. And the parents saying he was born blind, but they wouldn't see. There's none so blind as those that will not see. So very often the great education, the great scholarship, the great knowledge, the great reputation, the great position will blind the person from the real truth. And why are they blinded? Because they don't want to see. They don't want to, for the life of them, believe this man who suddenly was born blind, that everyone saw out there begging every day for food, was suddenly healed by Jesus Christ. They didn't want to believe that indeed the Messiah has come. Why? Because he didn't quite fit into the picture that they had in their minds of the similitude of God, or how God should operate, that they were expecting that God would send another Joshua who would blow all these trumpets and knock down the walls of Jericho, bring down Rome and set them up as lords and masters of the realm here on earth. So that didn't happen. Jesus coming, talking about a more spiritual revolution, a more spiritual. God is a spirit. And they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So back to the similitude of God, and Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 4, only take heed to thyself, keep thy soul diligently. We're body and spirit. We're looking at not the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. We're looking at the eternal solutions, not just the immediate physical solutions. Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently. Look after your who you are. You are both body and spirit. Keep thy soul, keep thy body. Yes, you need to eat. Labour not just for the meat which perisheth, but for that which endureth unto everlasting life. Keep your soul. What shall it profit a man should gain the whole world and lose his soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Your soul is priceless. You can't buy it back once you've lost it. Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen. Where they saw a lot of spiritual miracles in the Old Testament. Unless they depart. He's talking to people that have seen these great miracles, miraculous things that happened to these people in the wilderness. They left the flesh pots of Egypt. They left the realm of the senses that they had in Egypt, where they saw, smelt, touched and tasted. All of these wonders of Egypt, the flesh. They're into the flesh pots of Egypt. They had, no doubt, troubles and trials and tests in Egypt. Therefore, they wanted to leave Egypt and go into the wilderness for a better life. Well, they initially found a better life in the wilderness, though many, of course, in the end died in their sins, though they'd seen all these great wonders that God had performed right before their eyes and even their ears. even their physical ears and physical eyes, which is very rare. Most people would say that when they get these messages or have had these messages or visitations from the other realm, they didn't see anything, they just simply heard. They didn't hear a voice with their ears, but they certainly heard in the spiritual sense, and if it was a spirit could hear. Then you hear the still small voice of God, or you got these revelations, or whispers of the Spirit, as some people call them, or even how God was feeling in a situation, whether he was happy or sad, or even full of indignation and woe about such things, and reprimanding. All these things happen unto them, for an example, for our admonition or admonishing a person not to do or go so in such a way, in that you've got a visitation and revelation that filled you full of dread that you shouldn't be doing this, or you shouldn't be doing that, or if you go this way, there's a sense of impending doom. So you get this sense of woe from God, even. You get a sense of joy from God if you go this way. If you go that way, now this is the person I want you to be with, the person I want you to marry. So it can work all kinds of ways in that God can sow feelings and thoughts into your heart. And you can even have the feelings and thoughts from God that how he would feel about so and such a situation. Well, they had these visitations from God, and they actually saw it with their eyes and heard it with their ears. So quite a very powerful visitation from that other realm to the children of Israel. And Moses obviously sharing in the experience. Moses being like unto Jesus, a prophet like unto myself, Moses said would come. So Moses being like Jesus in the sense that he was the one to look to, who was getting all of these revelations and visitations from God. Moses from the beginning being sent an angel from God, and an angel from God operating and working together with Moses, and Moses seeing this angel coming to him in the burning bush. And so this angel in the burning bush speaking as God would speak and telling Moses, that I am, so speaking on God's behalf. And so Moses, in this same sense, seeing the similitude of God and operating quite directly under God's Spirit. Well, Moses saying here, only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen. They've clearly seen these miracles. And lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, and especially the day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb, on Mount Horeb, before Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, gather me thy people, the people together, and I will make them hear my words. So they actually heard God's voice with their physical ears, it appears here. I will make them hear my words, which is very rare, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, that they may teach their children. And ye came near and stood under the mount, and the mountain burned with fire, unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. So the mountain and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. They actually saw this with their eyes. So they're seeing the very God of heaven coming down to earth in this sense. They didn't see God, but they saw how God chose to appear to them. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. Ye heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude. So they didn't see God. They heard the voice of the words coming out of this fire. And this thick darkness, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. Darkness, clouds, and thick darkness is kind of like, this is serious. A serious occasion, and God coming to them in great seriousness and a great matter here. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the voice of the words, but saw no similitude, only ye heard a voice. And he declared unto you his covenant, this agreement between God and man, which we all should have, which he commanded you to perform, even 10 commandments, and he wrote them upon 2 tables of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go over to possess it. This is what it's all about, growing spiritually and following and walking in God's ways, in other words, and growing spiritually. Therefore ye take heed, therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude. So they didn't see God right. This is the danger of seeing God. It kind of underlines it here, the danger of seeing God. So no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest ye corrupt. So they didn't see God, is what I'm trying to say here. They didn't see God. They saw no similitude of God, but they did hear his voice. They saw this fire and thick smoke. They saw the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire unto the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. It's all of this. And they heard God's voice coming out of these clouds. So take ye therefore good heed unto yourselves, for ye saw no manner of similitude on the day that the Lord spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of fire, lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image. Now this is the danger, right? No one's seen God any time and lived. Jesus has seen what God looks like, and he lives. Only Jesus has seen God and lived. Jesus left his place in heaven. Jesus came down from heaven. Jesus came down from God. He's seen God. The Son of God is the only one who can declare him. So the only way we can ever see God is to see Jesus. So Jesus, the Word, was made flesh so that we could comprehend God. So he goes on to say, lest ye corrupt yourselves, ye saw no similitude. In other words, you didn't see what God looked like. You only heard the voice which spake unto you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest ye corrupt yourselves and make you a graven image, the similitude of any figure, the likeness of male or female.